Games Workshop have just hit us with a fairly meaty errata and FAQ for the greater good, so let's take a look at the changes for the Imperial Guard and the Tau. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Now the greater good posed quite a few questions as to the functioning of some certain rules that weren't entirely clear from the way they were phrased in the book. They do seem to have done fairly well at addressing most of the outstanding issues that I had thought of in this FAQ, particularly things around some of the new Tau prototype weapons, and a big and fairly obvious one for the Stormtroopers, that they'd kind of left as an oversight for the rules. In this FAQ for Psychic Awakening the Greater Good, they have one piece of errata and 3 FAQs for the Guard, about 5 times that amount for the Tau rules, and absolutely nothing for the Genestealer Cult. So I can only presume that whoever was writing their rules for the book did a bit of a better job at making them watertight, and there haven't been too many glaring issues. In this video we'll go over each FAQ one by one, discuss its in-game implications, and what it'll mean going forwards. We'll start with the Guard bits first, and then move on to all the Tau stuff. So without further talking, let's get started. First off, for the Imperial Guard, we have the Blessed Bolt Gun from the Iotan Gorgons Militarum Tempestus Regiment, which has become the Blessed Bolt Pistol, mainly because I don't think the Tempesta Prime could actually wield a bolt gun to use it, so it was sort of an unusable relic before then. Now to be honest, it was a bit peculiar when I saw it in the original rule set, as it was a rapid fire weapon with a 12-inch range, which meant that it would only get one shot at 12 inches. By updating it to the pistol, it actually is more powerful at 12-inch range, so it's technically a buff. And of course it's technically a buff anyway, because you couldn't take it before. It is a small but meaningful increase to firepower, and could certainly be worth a command point in the right situation, though with limited relic slots there might still be better choices. That's the only piece of errata. Now we're on to the FAQs. The first one is, can the full payload tankate ability be used to affect the mortal wound output of the Death Strike missile? The answer is no, unfortunately, which is a bit of a shame as it could make a Death Strike go up with an absolutely enormous bang. I don't think that this one is technically a change, as it was only a damage characteristic profile, and mortal wounds aren't technically damage output in the first place, so you couldn't have used it on it before. So this basically keeps that trait by being the one that you want to take on the Manticore and Basilisk in the first place, as who doesn't like a flat 3 damage Basilisk shot? Next up we have a question about move and the interaction between wilderness survivors, the regimental doctrine that allows your infantry to always be in cover, provided they haven't advanced. When I made my original video on the custom regiment traits, a clever person in the comments pointed out that move wouldn't actually break the requirement for the units gaining cover, as I believe the way that it was worded rules as written, if they hadn't advanced in the movement phase, then they would still get cover, and move happens in the shooting phase technically. But unfortunately they've countermanded that, and to be honest it does kind of fit the idea, as you do technically advance with move, so if the intent was no cover if you're advancing, then this one just looks like fixing an unintended loophole. Despite this being technically a small nerf, I still think it's one of the better custom regiment traits for infantry. 4+ armor save guardsman, provided you haven't advanced, certainly isn't too bad at all. Finally, we have probably the most major FAQ here, which is answering the question as to whether the special new Militarum Tempestus regiments are either instead of or in addition to the Stormtrooper trait in the Codex, the one that basically gives them 2 hits on every roll of a 6. Now for me the intents behind the doctrines were pretty much clear. You get them instead of the Stormtrooper trait, but they had left the wording open so you could rules lawyer it that you could get both. This very much shuts the door on that whole discussion though. You either choose the Stormtrooper trait, or you choose one of the new, and frankly generally better Militarum Regiment specific traits from the new book. So overall nothing too major for the Guard, technically one small nerf, fixing a relic to make it usable, and clarifying that the poor Death Strike doesn't get any benefit from that tankcase trait. Fairly simple stuff there. Now let's see what's happened to the Xenos, and there are a couple of pretty major changes here that it's worth being aware of if you do happen to be using Tau, or if you happen to be facing them on the other side of the table. Now there are quite a lot of changes here. We've got quite a lot of errata just to start with, and this is before we even get into the FAQ. Firstly, they've added the points cost for Commander Shadowsun, as like with Master Lazarus in the Ritual of the Damned, they forgot to put her points in the book. She's 127 points, they had already confirmed it on the Facebook and Warhammer community site, but it's good to have it here in an official rules source. I must admit though, it doesn't look very clever to leave out the points cost for your only model that you're releasing in a book. Next up we have a clarification on their prototype weapon systems, the massive fancy upgunned wargear that you can give some of your units instead of taking relics. Basically this is to clarify that they do function pretty similar to relics. You can't have more than one on the same unit, and you can't have each prototype weapon system more than once. This was the way that it sounded like it was intended, but without this clarification, I don't believe there was anything technically stopping you from doing either of these things. So technically a small nerf here, but this selection has got a bit of a buff in the FAQ section that we'll see in a second. Probably the biggest single change in the book was the change to modulated weaponry. This is the stratagem that allows you to roll the maximum amount of shots automatically when you're rolling to determine how many shots a weapon has. Say if you have a heavy D6 weapon, it automatically counters 6. Now I believe that this one was written with the Codex units in mind and not thinking about Forge World things, such as the scary Yavara battlesuit with its many shot flamer, and of course the mighty Taunar. These things could both get a ludicrous amount of extra damage output for the command point cost, and I just don't think that they'd thought about them at all. They've essentially limited it by saying it can now only be used on a Riptide Ghost Kill or vehicle model and not on a Titanic model. I do certainly think it could still be usable in the right situation, but really the biggest thing that people tended to be looking at with this one was the Yavara from Forge World, which isn't particularly strong at the moment, so in a way it's kind of a shame that it doesn't have one niche way that you could run it. Next up we have the Cyclic Ion Blaster, where I believe that they've printed an old version of the rule, where it used to overheat quite a lot more easily in the past. They've clarified it so that that was a mistake, and no matter how many ones you roll, you only take 1 mortal wound from it overcharging each turn. So you couldn't just roll a ton of ones for a model with Cyclic Ion Blasters and immediately have your commander dead or something. I believe the next one for the Master of War is just a page reference change, though please correct me if I'm wrong, it's just the Master of War rule, where he can call Montkar or Kauyon, and I don't believe it's changed in any way that I can see. Next is a quick errata to clarify who gets the aggressive footing ability in the Farside Enclaves. I believe that this is the one where you get rerolls for being close to the enemy, and is an upgrade to their standard Sept Tenet. This one just clarifies that you only get it if you're in a full Farside Enclaves detachment, just like you would for any other chapter tactic or something like that from another race. Next we have an interesting one that I'd missed as a potential consequence of the Veteran Carder stratagem. The Veteran Carder stratagem is the one that improves a battlesuit unit's ballistic skill to be 3+ rather than 4+. And I hadn't realised it, but the way that they worded it, it actually would have applied to drone units taken with the battlesuit unit as well. So in theory you could have had some pretty hilarious gun drone fire. I believe it would have been anything up to 72 ballistic skill 3+ gun drone pulse carbine shots if you wanted. Now someone has realised that. It's probably for the best that they've restricted this to just being for the battlesuits only, though it might have been funny to see massive units of veteran gun drones running around. Finally we have a change in the wording for the Seismic Fibrillator node. This is one of the relics that's available to the Farside Enclaves that I have to admit I didn't feel was enormously strong. Basically, this one works when you start or end a move within 6 inches of the model of this relic, then you roll a dice, on a 1, the unit suffers a mortal wound. So maybe if you charge them with a whole bunch of orc boys or something, you might be taking a fair few mortal wounds. The way that this was worded previously meant that this also applied for piling and consolidations as well, meaning that you could actually take a whole ton of mortal wounds just by charging if you wanted to also pile in and consolidate. They have basically taken pile in and consolidate off the table for that one, but I guess it could still be a slightly risky prospect to charge the bearer of the node. But I'm still not convinced it's very strong, because it does require your opponent to actually go and charge you, or deliberately move units closer to that unit when they know that the node is active for one turn. Personally I'd be very surprised if it was taken very much, and it is unique to the Farside Enclaves. Finally we come to the Tau Empire FAQs, and they've started off with a fairly big one. This is the one that clarifies that you are allowed to buy in additional prototype weapon systems with emergency dispensation, the extra relics stratagem from the Tau Codex, meaning that you could potentially have up to 3 prototype weapon systems running around on the board. Now some of these are really strong, and it's really quite powerful to be able to take more than one of them in a game. I actually have a video coming out on the prototype weapon systems very shortly after this one, and I was speculating as to whether or not this was allowed in the video as I recorded it beforehand. In particular, they have an incredibly scary ion accelerator, and the ability for a battlesuit unit to reroll ones of hit and wound rolls, both of which to me seemed very powerful indeed. Now you can easily have them both running around on the table together, so I think this is actually quite a big and important change for the Tau Codex, and it is actually a significant buff to their army. Next up we have a clarification to the Reactive Countermeasures prototype weapon system, which is the one that helps a battlesuit unit ignore -1 and -2 AP if they have an airbursting fragmentation launcher. I believe it could have been construed that the rule completely replaces the fragmentation projectors ranged damage output, which I wouldn't have said myself, but they've just clarified that it definitely doesn't, it's also in addition to that. Next we have another prototype weapon system, which is the Accelerated Photon Grenades. These ones half your advance and charge movement, and they've stated that this is in addition to the Photon Grenades that the model has already been armed with, which is definitely a nice buff. Next up we have a clarification on the cross-linked stabilizer jets, the ones that give the battlesuits reroll 1s to hit and wound as I mentioned before. And they're just clarifying that it is for the entire unit, not just one model, which I do believe was how it was stated before, but I suppose they felt that the wording was somewhat ambiguous. Next we have a couple of Seps Tenet clarifications. First of all, hybridized weaponry, the one that gives +4 inches to the range of the weapon, and they've just clarified how this interacts with the Breacher Team Fire Warriors and their multi-ranged gun. They've chosen to go with the weaker interpretation of the rule, which means that it only extends the range of the longer ranged version of the gun. Basically they get more damage the closer that they are to the unit, so this only extends the range of their weakest shot. The other two shots remain at their standard ranges. A bit of a shame in my opinion. It could have been an interesting Sep Tenet for these guys, and I don't think it would have been too overpowered. Next we have Upgunned, the one that improves armor penetration of burst cannons. They did state in the rule that it was just burst cannons, but they have clarified that this doesn't include high output burst cannons or long barreled burst cannons. It is just the standard burst cannon that gets the upgrade. It's possibly not the strongest pick in my opinion. Next we have another FAQ as pertaining to those accelerated photon grenades, basically saying that the -1 to hit penalty that they inflict on the target can also be stacked with regular photon grenades, which I thought was an interesting choice to be honest. It does mean that you could put -2 to hit on a unit, and if that's applied to something big and scary, it could be a very good way to frustrate your opponent's damage output. I'm still not sure if I'd be picking the accelerated photon grenades over some of the massive guns that you can get in these prototype weapon systems, so a small buff to them doesn't really hurt in my opinion. Finally, we have a last couple of clarifications to the Farside Enclaves. Firstly, aggressive footing, the rule where they count as having nearby units have +1 to the marker light tokens on them, which usually translates to having a reroll of 1 on those units when you're shooting at them to hit. They've clarified that if it had 0 marker light tokens on it, then you'd get 1 on it, which I was pretty sure is how it worked anyway. I guess the word additional maybe implies that there should have been 1 to start with, but that's not the way that I personally would have read it, so not a massive change there for me. And finally, they have noted that the Honoured Gauntlet and Fusion Blades relics that some models out of the 8 have slightly different rules to the ones in the base codex. Rather than keeping them the same profile, they've said that they actually function differently when equipped on the 8 compared with when they're brought in as relics from the Tau Empire codex. Not the biggest deal ever, although it is a little bit strange to have 2 exact same pieces of war gear running around with different rules in 8th edition depending on who's carrying it. So overall on the Tau Empire front, a pretty decent nerf to the modulated weaponry stratagem, making sure that you can't get veteran drones by accident, making sure that the seismic fibrillator nose doesn't go mental when you charge at it, and perhaps the most significant development, that you can definitely take multiple prototype weaponry, which I think we'll be seeing in a lot of the most competitive Tau lists. Beyond that, I think that the FAQs in Errata are mainly just minor bug fixes. So let me know your opinion on all of these changes down below. Anything you would have done differently, other than maybe not having to make all of these changes in the first place, particularly on the Tau front. I guess that potentially could have been a start. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where we have regular 40k content coming out every day, and feel free to check back later if you'd like to see my review of these new Tau prototype weapon systems, which will be coming out in just a few hours' time now. If you'd like to support the channel, I do have a Patreon page, which is how I can afford to keep on making all of these videos. Any support that you can spare is greatly appreciated if you've been enjoying the content and you want to help keep this channel going. In addition to supporting the channel, there's also things like early videos, voting on which videos come next, the occasional prize draw, and my own tournament lists when I attend events. If any of that sounds interesting to you, then please check out in the link down below in the video description. And as always, a big thank you to everyone who is helping support the channel. In any case, thank you very much for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys in the next episode.